Good evening. Welcome to Congregation B'nai Shalom and our Israel debate. I'm David Marshak, and I will be introducing the speakers and the moderator. The moderator is Reva Gamber, Director of the Jewish Federation of East Bay's Partnership for Israel. A frequently requested speaker, her talks on Israeli history, society, and culture, as well as film studies. She is also director of the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival, which will celebrate its 19th year in March 2013. 19th year in March 2014. And the former associate director of the JCRC of the East Bay. Reva is a graduate of Brown University. Then we have Dr. Michael Harris, was one of the founders of San Francisco Voice for Israel, which is now the Bay Area chapter of StandWithUs. He has spoken about Israel at synagogues, churches, political groups, and civic groups, as well as standing up for Israel against anti-Israel demonstrators on the streets of the Bay Area. If there's an anti-Israel demonstration, somebody from Michael's group will be there to counter it. He has appeared on radio and television, news reports as a local spokesperson for StandWithUs and SF Voice for Israel. In his spare time, he is a pediatrician in Marin County. And this is Gordon Gladstone, Northwest Regional Director of J Street. Gordon has worked in the Jewish community since 1995 in a variety of settings, including Hillel, synagogues, and youth groups, and he was at Berkeley Hillel at one point. Gordon is a former Israeli tour educator and spent more than 5 years living in Israel, mostly at Kibbutz Getzer. Gordon holds an MA in history and has lectured on topics of Jewish and Zionist history. Gordon joined J Street in 2010 and lives near San Francisco with his wife and 2 sons. I am fortunate to know all of these people. I have worked with Gordon and Dr. Mike. They are both very, very strong supporters of Israel, who in my view, help a lot. It is the situation with Israel that we are going to talk about tonight is enormously complex. It is multi-layered. When we're dealing with something like that, it is a good thing to have diverse points of view and diverse ideas. It helps us in many ways because there's no guaranteed one true answer to something this complex. This is on webcam tonight, which means that there are people in the audience who can see us, and there are also devices for those who have hearing problems where they can plug directly this public address system, and this seems to be going on and off. Anyway, thank you very much for being here.
Erev Tov, good evening. On behalf of the Jewish Federation of the East Bay, I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight, and I especially want to thank Congregation B'nai Shalom for partnering with the Federation or allowing us to partner with them and for their hospitality. One of the major goals of the Federation is to strengthen the ties between the people of Israel and the people of the East Bay. We do this by providing scholarships to young adults and teens who want to study or work in Israel on special programs. We do it by supporting Birthright, a great program that many of you are aware of for people in their 20s. And we do that by sponsoring cultural and educational programs in the East Bay, including one, this is an advertisement, this Thursday at the Contra Costa Jewish Day School with the Jerusalem Post reporter Gil Hoffman starting at 7:30. We also sponsor the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival coming up in March 2014. And we're moving to the Century Theater for those who were worried about the Center Art being demolished. And probably around 25 of our films in March will be done by Israeli directors, so hope we'll see you there. One of the other things we do is to support financially innovative and impactful Israeli organizations dedicated to making the lives of Olim, immigrants, better in Israel, and in doing social action projects. One of the ones we're very proud of is Draw Israel. 2 weeks ago at Rabin Square, the youth educators, those in their 20s and 30s, of Draw Israel, an urban kibbutz movement of educators, sponsored a commemoration in memory of the 18th, long time ago, anniversary of the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. There at the podium, many diverse voices were heard, from the ultra-Orthodox to conservative reform, modern Orthodox and secular, Jews and Arabs and young and old, all pledging to renew the Zionist vision for which Rabin stood, that of democracy, that of justice, and that of tolerance. Tonight, this evening, we'll hear from voices which may agree or disagree depending upon the questions, and I ask that we all treat our speakers with respect by listening, and then, if you have questions, to write them down on the index cards that you got when you came in. This is important in order to make sure that we treat everyone with kavod, with dignity. If you feel inclined to stand up and say something to interrupt, I will ask any individual to sit down or to journey out of the sanctuary, because this is a holy place, and Judaism demands a spirit of tolerance and, as I said, dignity. This evening, as we think about Yitzhak Rabin, in the regular calendar, it's in November. The Jewish calendar just happened around 2 weeks ago. May the memory of this great man bring us together in support of the people of Israel. May Rabin's memory be a blessing to all of us. And now, the famous coin toss. I was told that's how debates go, so one of you say which side you like, and you'll go first.
Is there any Freudian activity?
No.
Okay, I'll take.
I'm a young person.
Oh, okay.
Which?
Tails.
Okay. You have Tails goes first.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, we're delighted to welcome both Gordon Gladstone, Regional Director of J Street, and Dr. Mike Harris, the community activist of StandWithUs. You both represent organizations that are viewed differently in the community in regard to your Israel posture. Labels are attached, but we're going to throw them out the door because we may find great similarities between them as we support the people of Israel. So the first question or statement is, and you go first, Gordon. You want everyone to close your cell phones. Please remove all electronic devices, or at least put them away, and make sure they're turned off. We'll have a pregnant pause while you do that. Okay? Thank you. The question is, how does your organization define its objectives, indeed its vision regarding Israel? And what do you see as commonalities and disagreements between your two organizations? That's most important.
Good evening. So I want to start off by sharing a thought from Aleph Bet Yeshua. He said recently that a Zionist is someone who believes that Israel is the responsibility of all Jews. This is something that guides me as a Jew, as a Zionist, and an Israeli citizen, and it also informs my work with J Street. J Street is the political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans. J Street understands that in order to ensure that Israel can continue as a Jewish and democratic homeland, we cannot continue to rule another people. We see this as an existential issue for the vision of Israel laid out by David Ben-Gurion in 1948. J Street's goal when we started was simply to put the conflict back on the president's agenda and the diplomatic process on track to solve it. And much to our delight, that's precisely what's happened. Secretary Kerry has asked all who care about Israel's future to support this effort and be what he calls the Great Constituency for Peace. And that's why J Street has launched a new campaign called the Two Campaign to mobilize and expand support for ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through a negotiated two-state solution. Today, the two-state solution is supported by the overwhelming majority of Jewish Americans and Americans generally, and it's been adopted as national policy by Republican and Democratic presidents alike. So it's important to ask, what will it really take to get there? What are the hard choices that have to be made? For instance, how can you support a two-state solution and not be willing to talk about making the Palestinian neighborhoods of Jerusalem the capital of the new state of Palestine? How can you support a two-state solution yet refuse to acknowledge that the border will be drawn along the pre-67 armistice lines with agreed-upon land swaps? How can you say you support a two-state solution and call those supporters indefensible or be unwilling to talk about evacuating settlements? Similarly for Palestinians, how can you say you support a two-state solution and not acknowledge that refugees of 48 and their descendants will not be returning to Israel? There won't be agreement on these issues without also addressing Israel's security concerns, most likely through a demilitarized Palestinian state and significant international presence on the borders. That's the essence of the campaign, to explain what the two-state solution really entails and build the great constituency for peace that Secretary Kerry has called for. To learn more about the campaign, you can visit the website, 2campaign. That's 2, the number, campaign.org. You can learn more about the issues and sign a petition in support of John Kerry's work. I look forward to a robust conversation and how we can work to secure Israel as our Jewish and democratic homeland. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. And now Dr. Mike.
All right, thank you. Stand With Us is a little bit different. We're not all about politics. Our objective is really telling Israel's side of the story to the public. We do that through a variety of print materials, YouTube videos, social media presence, if necessary, public and transit advertisements, if necessary, being there for counter demonstrations to get our voice out to the media, TV, radio appearances. Our vision is a safe and secure Jewish state of Israel at peace with its neighbors, and that I don't think is really anything different than what you would like to see. But the details of that peace and how it's going to look, that's up to the elected government of Israel to negotiate with a Palestinian leadership that is willing to live in peace and mutual recognition with the Jewish state. We don't lobby our members on legislation, we don't support candidates, nor do we have a specific program for Israel to make peace and threaten to oppose its government if they don't follow it. We don't try to dictate to the government and people of Israel what decisions they have to make on the hard choices facing them. There's plenty of criticism out there, and sadly, much of it is not constructive criticism, but destructive. So our role is to counter that destructive criticism. We oppose BDS, as does J Street, but we also oppose groups such as Breaking the Silence that are used by the BDS movement in support of their anti-Israel agenda. And that's why Stand With Us every spring brings the Israeli Soldiers Speak Out program to campuses and communities all around the country. Finally, our view of threats to Israel is somewhat different than J Street's. I heard Jeremy Ben-Ami state that the settlements were the #1 threat to Israel's security. Now, what we've seen elsewhere in the Middle East, with Iran's relentless drive for nuclear weapons, with the carnage going on in Syria, with Hezbollah with its tens of thousands of rockets, I know that you'll agree with me that none of these threats will be lessened if Israel withdraws to the Green Line. Are settlements an important issue that Israel will have to address in the context of a peace agreement? Absolutely. But unfortunately, the #1 barrier to peace between Israel and its neighbors is the same as it has been: the over 65-year war of the Palestinian leadership against the very existence of a Jewish state. And that type of demonization and delegitimization is what we fight against.
Thank you. Next question. Secretary of State Kerry has devoted much of his time recently in bringing the state of Israel together with the Palestinian Authority, with the hopes of jump-starting the peace negotiations and seeing them to a successful conclusion. I know you've touched upon it, Gordon, but perhaps more. How do you see the role of American Jews in the peace process? Our second question.
So, what has been asked of us by both the President and the Secretary of State is to be what they describe as this great constituency for peace. And I come at this from a standpoint of Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Lezeh, which is a Jewish value that says we are all responsible for one another, all Jews. And we have always been there for Israel in times of war. No less so, we should be there for Israel in a time of peace. And the path to peace will be difficult. There are both risks and rewards on that path. There are people who will oppose that path. And right now, the government of Israel has said they treat the Palestinian Authority and President Mahmoud Abbas as a partner with whom to have these conversations. They are in negotiations. They entered into a 9-month process that will conclude sometime in April. And from that, there is an expectation that should they successfully conclude, a final status agreement will emerge. At that time, there will be a tremendous amount of challenge to that. If it is the will of the Israeli government and the ruling coalition that they should take that path towards peace, then I believe that it is our duty as Jews and American Jews to support that path.
Same question.
Thank you. We're not going to have a lot of disagreement on that one. The Israeli journalist Khaled Abu Tawama had an interview published last week in which he summarized it very well. He said the Israelis should talk with anyone that wants to talk with them and shoot back at anyone that shoots with them. So American Jews can and should, and I would say must, support negotiations because negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians are the only route to peace. At the same time, I don't think that we should necessarily support American attempts to exert pressure towards a specific outcome. I was at the AIPAC Policy Summit in Napa last week, and the very well-respected analyst Aaron David Miller, who's been an advisor to 6 secretaries of state on Arab-Israeli negotiations, he quoted Harvard President Larry Summers as saying, "In the course of history, no one has ever washed a rental car," by which he means if you don't own it, then you're not invested in it. And the people that have to own these negotiations are the Israelis and the Palestinians. At the same event, though, Lord David Trimble, who won the 1998 Nobel Peace Prize for his work in settling the Northern Ireland dispute, noted that talks can be counterproductive as long as one side seeks victory over the other. And unfortunately, there are mountains of evidence that the end game for the Palestinian leadership, at least up to this point, has been the elimination of Jewish statehood. So yes, absolutely, we should support talks. It's the only route to peace. What we also need to be prepared for, as Miller pointed out last week, is possible failure. And successive Israeli governments have made it clear that they'll support a Palestinian state. And if there's an agreement reached, Gordon and I and everybody in this room will stand together and we'll be saying Shehechianu, and we will be delighted that this has happened. But what if it doesn't? What if the minimum Palestinian demands exceed what Israel is able to concede? For example, if Palestinians won't accept the end of the conflict, if they won't give up their insistence on the fiction of a right of return for generations of descendants of Palestinian refugees, if they won't accept that the Jewish people have the right of national self-determination in at least a portion of our historic homeland, then we need to stand with the elected government of Israel. Now, what if the Palestinians came forward with an agreement that was verifiable and enforceable and fair, and the Israeli government were to reject it? Well, we all know what would happen. They would publish the terms of the offer, and immediately the coalition in Israel would fall, and there would be new elections, and the Israeli public, through their elected government, would then accept a fair resolution to the conflict. I think the concern far more is that any Palestinian leader who signs an agreement with Israel would have a very, very short lifespan. So yes, absolutely, we need to support negotiations. It is the only way to peace. But we also need to be prepared to back our brothers and sisters in Israel if they decide that they can't guarantee their citizens' safety within what the Palestinians are offering.
Thank you. I'm going to take 30 seconds. If you have index cards in which you'd like to place your question, raise them, and people on the Israel Engagement Committee will pick them up. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Our third question. This past August, Eilat's airport had to be closed down for, I think, almost a day due to a potential threat from terrorists in Sinai who had gotten a hold of powerful missiles capable of shooting down aircraft. In creating peaceful relations between Israel and the Palestinian people, borders probably, most likely, will have to change. How do you see Israel securing its own citizens' safety when Israel is being asked to shrink in size to secure a peaceful relationship with the Palestinian Authority?
This is...
Okay, you switch, you go first.
Right. Please take turns on that. This is where any agreement is really going to require credible and far more effective means of verifying compliance than we've seen so far. United Nations troops are going to be useless. We saw that in 1967 when Nasser dismissed the UN force in Sinai. We've seen it in Lebanon, where despite Security Council Resolution 1701, Hezbollah has rearmed right under the nose of United Nations troops that also did not interfere when Hezbollah attacked across the border in 2006. And we've seen it in the Golan, where the United Nations Disengagement Observation Force troops have fled because of the instability in Syria. So this is why Israel has insisted on being able to control the Jordan River Valley. Now, one can hope that the Palestinians will see the benefits of peace and realize that it is in their own interest to maintain peace, much as Egypt has done since 1979. But given the relentless incitement that even from the Fatah organization that controls the PA, every single week on PA TV, on Facebook, you have ongoing incitement, glorification of terrorism, praising the shooting of a 9-year-old girl on her family porch in Psagot the other week. We have a right to be skeptical. David Makovsky, a very well-respected analyst, has noted that nobody ever went broke being a pessimist about the Middle East. This is the point where we need to reiterate that Israel will be taking enormous risks for peace, based simply on a promise by the Palestinian leadership to behave themselves and to rein in the terrorists that they themselves have been nurturing and promoting for decades. There's a lot of skepticism that Abbas can deliver on any agreement that he signs, and that skepticism is not just limited to the Likud party. I'll read you a quote. Many in the international community see Abbas as a peace partner, and this might be partially true, but so what? The question we need to ask is, can this man deliver? What's a peace agreement worth with Abbas when he can't even visit his house in Ramallah that has been taken over by Hamas? And that quote is from Khaled Abu Tawma. So only the Israelis can decide what risks they're willing to accept. And again, if those who are responsible for the safety and security of the citizens of Israel decide that they can't adequately protect them against the risk posed by a Palestinian state with its current unstable leadership, then what do we as American Jews do? Would we abandon them in that case? And we say no.
Gordon.
So I think it's important to differentiate between rhetoric and action. There is a tremendous amount of awful rhetoric resonating around the Middle East. Really gruesome, deplorable stuff. But on the side of action, there's actually some cause for hope. Both the current Prime Minister and his predecessor have both agreed that Mahmoud Abbas is a partner for peace. Moreover, the security forces that he commands have maintained a regime of control that has kept the West Bank relatively terror-free, some years almost completely terror-free. And that bodes well. One of the benchmarks for any polity is the question of the monopoly on the use of force. And this is a standard that will need to be adhered to by a new Palestinian state. It is the expectation of anybody who has commented on the situation that the agreement that would emerge in April would have robust security guarantees and international supervision of such. Some have speculated that perhaps NATO troops would be used. I don't know to what degree that bears out. I certainly agree that the track record of the UN has been remarkably wanting. Ultimately, there is also not necessarily a trade-off for Israel between real estate and security. Those are not one-to-one corresponding issues. The real estate is an asset. Security is a situation. The goal is to create a situation in which you have security. And if that means ceding pieces of real estate in order to obtain that in a long-lasting agreement, like we did with Egypt and with Jordan, right? There were small territorial swaps in the treaty with the Jordanians. And that border has been remarkably quiet, aside from one particularly horrific incident that I can recall in the early years. There is reason for hope. I agree, skepticism is warranted, but hope is also called for.
I want to throw in an extra question. Um, Israel did make peace with Sinai, with Egypt, and with Jordan. But those in many ways, from my viewpoint, are real estate swaps, deals. But the situation with the Palestinian Authority, with Hamas, is more existentialist. So how do you make peace with that? Not that you can't, but how do you see a difference between the peace made between Egypt and Jordan and a peace that could be made with the Palestinians?
There is a difference because Egypt was simply returning the Sinai in exchange for peace. The situation with the Palestinians is different. Israel is being asked to do something which has never been done before, and that is help create the first ever Palestinian state. In history, there has never been such a thing. So Israel is also being asked to give up parts of what is the historical heritage of the Jewish people. Ultimately, though, I'm going to quote, and I don't have the exact words in front of me, so I'll paraphrase it. The wonderful Israeli writer and speaker Yossi Klein Halevi, he wrote about 3 years ago. He said, the only solution to the conflict is for Israelis to give up their right of return to Hebron and Beit Lechem in exchange for the Palestinians giving up their right of return to Haifa and Jaffa. That the Israelis, the Jews, the Jewish people will give up our right of return to Greater Israel in exchange for the Palestinians giving up their right of return to Greater Palestine. He also went on to note that the Israeli political system and the Israeli public had already internalized that. And at least at that time, 3 years ago, the Palestinian public and political system had not. So again, this falls in the category of very, very difficult decisions for Israel. Evacuating a few thousand citizens from Gaza was a gut-wrenching experience for the Israeli polity. Dealing with many, many more in the West Bank across the Green Line is going to be far more. And we know that what the people of Israel want is they want peace. And what they don't want to do is give up land that is part of our people's historic homeland and bring a potential enemy even closer to their population centers without being sure that this is going to lead to peace. They've seen this movie before in Gaza and Lebanon. They don't need to see it again across the Green Line. But what this means, again, is that we as Americans, we need to be supporting Israel to say, you take the political space to make the hard decisions that you need to make, but we're not going to abandon you if you don't agree with the specifics that we have laid out that you should agree to.
So let me start off by first noting that the Palestinian territories are currently governed under two different regimes. There is Fatah and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank that is a negotiating partner with the State of Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. There is Hamas in the Gaza Strip, an irredentist terrorist organization that is committed to Israel's destruction. The best path forward then would be to negotiate a successful settlement with the Palestinian Authority and create a track record that then shows what the success of accommodation and those difficult compromises that you spoke about, which are truly, national narrative compromises that the population of the Gaza Strip can then look to and say, ha, that is what to be among the nations looks like, as opposed to where we are now. And hopefully then they too follow that lead. It's also worth pointing out, Mike raised the question of both the Gaza withdrawal and the Lebanon withdrawal. A member of Israel's foreign ministry said to me once, I raised that with him, he said, right, but you have to understand, we did those unilaterally. We just got up and left, and they were disasters. He said, but if you look at Jordan and Egypt, those are successes. What's the difference? He said, American involvement is the difference. American leadership was the difference. And I think that's an important piece to understand. So as American citizens, it's important for us to raise our voices and to say to our elected representatives, for the sake of my people, I ask you to be involved in this. For the sake of my nation, I ask you not to turn your backs on the world. For the sake of my history, I need you to pay attention to this.
Thank you. Another question? Who wants to go first? Oh, okay. What is your approach to furthering the engagement of American Jews in relationship to Israel? And how do you see American Jews engaging with Israel? So it's the same question.
So I don't know how many people have seen the Pew survey results. People seen these? Right. So if you look at them, they actually have a fairly grim portrait of what it means to be invested in the conversation, both Jewishly and around Israel. And basically, you can draw a line of the congruence of age and involvement in the conversation. And the younger you are, the less involved you are in the conversation. So a very quick anecdote that I think sums up nicely one of the challenges we face. So when I worked on the UC Berkeley campus, there was a group of graduate students who started a new student organization. And they were pretty far to the left and pretty ambivalent about whether or not to affiliate with the Hillel. Because the Hillel standard was you had to be an avowed Zionist organization. They weren't quite sure they wanted to sign on that dotted line. And the interest of finding out who they were and my own intellectual curiosity, I had coffee with one of their leaders. Turns out this was a guy who had gone to A school, had been involved in USY, came from Long Island, studying a postdoc in some branch of the biological sciences I don't even pretend to understand. Smart kid. And I said to him, look, I gotta ask, how did you go from where you were to where you are, where you really don't think there should be a state for the Jews? He looked at me and he said, didn't you have that moment? What moment? The moment where you realized everything they taught you about Israel was a lie? Now, I don't know who taught him or what experience he had, but if anybody's walking away with that kind of experience, it means we're not having the kind of robust conversations that we're having this evening, where everybody gets to talk about their feelings, to examine their positions, and not feel that there's a right way, a wrong way, an orthodoxy to which they must toe the line. If we're doing that successfully, I think we'll draw more people into the conversation, and we'll be stronger as a people, both religiously, Zionistically. Is that a word? Oh, it is now. And that will be good for us. But when we say there's just one way, and to that of the highway, people will walk out the door. I've seen it happen. It will continue to happen. And let's not do that to our kids.
I think we absolutely agree that too many American Jews are estranged from Israel. Part of the issue is age. Pretty much nobody younger than me is going to remember the 1967 war, and people under 50 aren't going to remember the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And too many American Jews are estranged from Judaism. They're not involved in synagogues, they're not involved in our Jewish community institutions. And the images of Israel that are in the media that are very, very appropriately critiqued by organizations such as Camera and Honest Reporting, those media images don't help the situation either. So our role at Stand With Us is to help educate both inside and outside the Jewish community. There are so many American Jews, not you folks who are here tonight, but there's so many out there who are what I would describe as Israel illiterate. They just don't know about it, and they have not been there. They're getting their information from, unfortunately, some of the same type of people that the student you're describing got his information from. Those folks are still out there on campus. They're called Students for Justice in Palestine. In the community, they're called Jewish Voice for Peace or Al-Auda or by any one of a number of other names. And these folks are out there spreading the lies that are unfortunately affecting people who are not hearing the other side of the story. Even people who know they support Israel as the state of the Jewish people don't necessarily have enough information to be able to counter the malignant lie that Israel is an apartheid state, or to be able to respond to the misinformation on what I like to call the map that lies. You've all seen that 4-part map showing that the area between the river and the sea was all Palestinian land before Israel took it, and Israel is somehow expanding on it. And that's why I give talks to come out to educate people inside the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community, and counter these lies. And we have people across the country who do the same type of thing, going into communities and educating. And we have a robust campus program to reach out to students and give them the information to counter the lies that they're hearing from other sources. And that's why we bring bright and articulate young Israelis to speak on campuses and to be able to speak from personal experience and tell them what's really going on. Now, indeed, as David pointed out, there's a lot of complexity to the situation, and we should not be ignoring that. And giving a platform to a wide range of pro-Israel voices is absolutely appropriate. But that should exclude representatives of groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace, who partner with extremist groups such as American Muslims for Palestine, who are part of the BDS movement, and whose role is to drive an anti-Israel wedge through the American Jewish community. So we can have these conversations, but we should have them with a wide range of pro-Israel voices. We don't need to be presenting the anti-Israel narrative ourselves.
Thank you. The best way to engage is also to go to Israel. How many have been to Israel? Okay, wow. That's great. For those of you who have not or want to go again in May 2015, there'll be a community trip organized by the Jewish Federation to go to Israel, just like we had 6 months ago. So I invite you to learn more, and you can email me at riva, R-I-V-A, @jfed.org. Our next question is moving to Iran. Decide who answers first. The Obama administration is investing in diplomacy to deal with Iran's nuclear threat. Is this a prudent course that will lead to the removal of Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium, or, as some critics charge, the road to ultimately sacrificing Israel's security vis-a-vis Iran and the bomb?
So, J Street has long argued for diplomacy and tough sanctions before force. And one could argue that the resumption of talks, which seem to be underway with some seriousness, are a result of that. But I think it's important to ask ourselves, so if it's not diplomatic engagement and sanctions, what is it? And the alternative is a use of force. And it's important to ask ourselves, where does that take us? Is there an appetite for that? And what kind of exposure, both to Israel and the United States and our allies, does that create? We need to push the process as far as we can. It doesn't mean to be naive about it. It doesn't mean to give anybody a free pass. Sanctions should only be lifted as a result of a comprehensive agreement that is verifiable.
Short and absolutely correct. Nobody sitting here should believe in the sincerity of the Iranian regime except when they say death to Israel. You have a regime that's had a secret nuclear weapons program for years and is now suffering through sanctions that are cratering their economy, all to claim the right to continue to enrich uranium, supposedly for peaceful purposes. You know, Canada and Mexico both have peaceful nuclear energy programs. Neither one of them enrich uranium. You don't need to enrich uranium to generate energy from nuclear power. You can import the fuel. Rouhani himself said in 2005, any country which has mastered uranium enrichment can make nuclear weapons. So, we know what the Iranian regime is about. And absolutely, sanctions are the only way to force Iran to the table, and sanctions are the only way short of military force to get Iran to give up its nuclear weapons program. And the question is not, should force be used? The question is, what's worse? The use of force to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, or Iran with a nuclear weapon? Now, we hope that we don't get to the point of having to answer that question. So, again, I'm going to speak for myself here simply because Stand With Us doesn't take position on legislation. But it's very, very clear. Sanctions need to be strengthened as the only way to force Iran to give up its nuclear weapons program. And Gordon, this is one spot where we're going to disagree a little bit, because I'm very disappointed that out of 20 members of the House of Representatives that voted against increasing sanctions on Iran on July 31st, J Street is endorsing 11 of them for re-election in 2014. Now, I know you're going to tell me that that's not one of the criteria that J Street uses for endorsement. My suggestion to you is that it should be.
Thank you. Any rebuttal or no? You don't have to.
So let me just say this. Ultimately, the president should have the ability to pursue an agenda that he feels will be most productive, and to try and generate foreign policy from a variety of different voices is going to be very daunting. So there are tough sanctions. Nobody's arguing to relax them preemptively. Those sanctions, as you said, have already cratered their economy. What more do we get out of more?
We get a better agreement. We get them negotiating to give up their nuclear program rather than insisting on their right to either maintain their stocks of uranium or to continue to enrich uranium. Because if we don't get a good deal, and even the President and Secretary Kerry have said this, a no deal is better than a bad deal. So we have to increase sanctions on Iran to the point that they are going to make the deal that we and the rest of the world can live with.
Our last question from me, and then we'll go to your questions. So if you want to write down more questions, just raise your hand, and someone from the committee will pick them up. Recently, I heard a lecture by Consul General Dr. Andy David. If you haven't met him, he's a great new Consul General, and the doctor stands for Doctor of Dentistry. So he's now in the Foreign Ministry and also can do your teeth if you have a spare moment. But a very bright Consul General. We're very glad to have him. He talked about the fact that, unfortunately, Israel's brand is one of war, is one of austerity. It's one of sandstone and ultra-religious and conflict. And this puts many people off, including American Jews and people around the world. What do you see as some practical ways in which we can expand Israel's brand beyond the sense of conflict, war, and strife?
Sure, this is a very, very important thing to do. And if you take a look on your way out at some of the materials we have on the table, we highlight Israel's achievements in technology, in the environment, in delivering aid to people who are victimized by natural disasters, such as in Haiti. We highlight Israel's diversity. Last year, one of the two young Israelis that was touring the Pacific Northwest was a wonderfully accomplished, delightful, young Israeli Druze woman from Haifa. And she was here as part of the Stand With Us program to talk about her country, Israel. This is a young woman who's got 2 degrees, who works in biotech, who is a member of President Perez's Citizens Advisory Council, and a wonderful example of the diversity of Israel. And there were people who were absolutely amazed and didn't really even know that non-Jews in Israel have opportunities like Rania did. We have a wonderful display. Many of you may have seen it if you went to Israel in the Gardens in 2012, called Israel Matters, a full-size panel display that highlights much of Israel's achievements in these areas, and that has even been to the state capital in Sacramento. Ultimately, though, and I think we're going to agree on this, there's nothing better for Israel's brand than peace. So we want to see peace. Absolutely. That would be the best thing to happen. And I've been a little bit pessimistic here. I've been channeling David Makovsky a little bit, so I don't want to be, too pessimistic about things. But we have to understand the risks that the people of Israel are considering taking for this. And it's very, very easy for us sitting here in California, in the relative safety here, to be able to tell the people of Israel, well, you need to take these steps for peace, when we're not the ones who are there. I'll tell you a very quick story. 4 weeks ago tonight, I was sitting in Jerusalem, and I was talking with an Israeli grandmother. Okay, she's my wife's first cousin. She made Aliyah back in the 1970s. Now, she's pretty left-wing. She consistently votes Meretz, as does her husband and all 4 of her children who served in the IDF. And she said to me, she said, you know, even if it's just unilateral, we should just end the occupation, and if it leads to a war, so be it. Now, for many reasons, including the ones that Gordon pointed out, I disagree with her. But she is the one who has the right to say this. She and her fellow citizens of Israel are the ones who are going to make those decisions, because it's not my children, it's her children that are going to get called up if a war breaks out. And I think what we need to do in all of this process is simply respect the fact that the people of Israel have very, very hard decisions to make. Our role is not to tell them what those decisions need to be. It's to support them in making the decisions and to help them by fighting here against the people who are out to demonize and delegitimize the Jewish state of Israel.
Thank you. Before, you mentioned David Makovsky. A lot of people may not know who he is. He works for the Washington Institute, an excellent, I think we'd call it a think tank. Dennis Ross, the former brilliant man in the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, also I still believe is probably part of the Washington Institute. And you can get e-blasts from them with articles from their very bright think tank people who are academics, former military leaders, etc. So it's the Washington Institute, and you can Google it or Yahoo it or whatever. I shouldn't be partial to get their e-blast with information. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, thank you. So I can just say Google. Okay, Google it.
And they actually have a great set of maps you can play with. If you were wondering, what it would take to evacuate X number of settlers or not, and what kinds of land swaps the Palestinians would ask for in return, and the map is interactive, so you can drag it back and forth. You can say, 10,000 settlers need to get moved, the rest stay in place. What does that look like on the map, etc. Okay, on to my answer. Now the timer starts. Let me start off by saying J Street is not engaged around this branding work. This is not our work. Having said that, the quickest thing that would likely leap to mind is, wow, we have something in the order of 5 million ambassadors here in the United States, members of the Jewish community. So we would want to see to it that they have a well-rounded, well-educated position on Israel. They understand it well. One of the things that we've been very successful in doing is engaging college students through our J Street U program, which is the fastest growing Jewish college program in the country. That being said, I also agree that ultimately Israelis will have to make that decision. And it is up to us to support, to paraphrase Rabin, security as if there was no peace process, and support peace as if there was no terror. We need to be that great voice for peace when Israel chooses to make peace. Ultimately, I look forward to a day when my children, both born in Israel and therefore liable for service should they choose it, can choose to don the uniform of their country and serve in that uniform and not have to think about whether or not they'll be asked to do something that is contrary to their values that they learned from their rabbis and their teachers and their parents. So that's my vision, and that's my hope, and that's why I'm invested in this work.
Thank you both. Now questions from the floor. Anyone, if you have another card, just raise it, and Marguerite, the chair of the Israel Engagement Committee, will pick it up. And you can decide to answer it or not, depending. What is the most common misunderstanding about your organization?
Okay, all right, I'll go. Oh, wow.
It's from the floor.
All right.
The audience wants to know.
Okay. I would probably say that the most common misunderstanding is that we are a right-wing organization. Now, of course, labels get thrown around in a very, facile manner. The meaning of left-wing and right-wing itself can be very vague. I'll tell you on a personal level, I filled out an online questionnaire from the Israel Democracy Institute before the last Israeli elections, and it basically said, here are the different positions of the parties, here are the issues on which they take positions. Tell us what you think about this, and we will tell you, what party you should likely be voting for. So I went through the process, and it told me that if I had those positions that I told them, I should be voting for Tzipi Livni. So I am not, sitting here as a right winger. I think I am a centrist. I think that the way we can describe our organization is aggressively moderate, because we take a position that really isn't a specific political program for Israel. We take a position of promoting Israel's right to exist as the state of the Jewish people in security, in peace with its neighbors. And that should really be able to attract people all the way from Meretz over to Likud. So I think we are very, very straightforward in promoting Israel. We definitely have a strong program, both in campuses and communities, to say we are going to stand up for Israel against those who oppose its existence at all. But again, we're not taking politics as a very, very specific partisan position within the Israeli political spectrum.
Thank you. Gordon?
So perhaps the biggest misconception is that we tell Israel what to do, which we don't do. J Street is the political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans. And as I said earlier, we seek to raise American voices to their elected officials here in America to influence a matter of foreign policy that is near and dear to our hearts.
The next question, what would constitute an adequate indication that the Palestinians really accept Israel's right to exist and will not have a peace agreement and then won't bring something else up which will cause another war? In other words, sincerity.
Right. Thomas Friedman said, so if Mahmoud Abbas sings Hatikva in perfect Yiddish, will that be enough? I don't think we're going to get that. I couldn't do it in Yiddish, since it's written in Hebrew. Anyway, ultimately, I think that's where we need to look to really robust, multilateral, internationalized security guarantees. That was the formula at Camp David. That was the formula with the Jordanians. Even the quiet of the Syrian border, for people who remember back to 73, or you read about it in a history book, was a result of a U.S. brokered ceasefire, with Kissinger flying back and forth between Damascus and Tel Aviv. So it is that international engagement that I think ultimately will prove to be the guarantee, rather than trying to discern what mysteries lie in a human heart.
I think there's a very, very straightforward step that the Palestinian leadership can take to show that they're sincere, and the incitement, and the postings on Facebook that glorify terrorists who have been mass murderers of civilians, and the Palestinian Authority TV sermons that talk about Jews as the sons of apes and pigs, and the statements from their leadership that there is no Jewish history in the land of Israel, that there was no Jewish temple in Jerusalem, that the Jews are a colonial settler presence in our historic homeland, and the incitement, that will show sincerity.
Thank you. Oh, you have to write it down on a card. So could someone get Dr. Jacobson a card and he can write it down? Thank you. A different area. Jews are leaving Europe because of anti-Semitism. Where will they go if there is not a Jewish majority in Israel to allow immigration?
Sure. The idea that I can see what the questioner is getting at, Israel is the state of the Jewish people, and it can always be a refuge for people who need to flee. We are seeing a rising tide of anti-Semitism in Europe, unfortunately most of it fueled by radical jihadist Islam. We have seen Jews shot down on the streets of France. This is not news to anybody that's here. We know that the French Jewish community is educating the younger generation that they are going to need to leave and go to Israel. America is not the Jewish homeland. America is not the state of the Jewish people. So we can't ask that America be the haven of last resort for our people. And that is one of the many functions that Israel serves as the state of the Jewish people. It's not the only one. It's not the sole raison d'etre for its existence, because there are many, many more features to Israel. We have, for the first time in thousands of years, our own nation. We have a country that lives by the rhythms of the Jewish calendar. We have a country that tries as best it can under very difficult circumstances to organize itself and organize its policies around our teachings. So all of these are important. But existing as a refuge for Jews who need to go there, absolutely. That's just one of the important roles that Israel, as the state of the Jewish people, serves. And if Israel were ever not to have a Jewish majority, if you were to have what the anti-Israel agitators, such as Ali Abu Nima, promote a quote-unquote one-state democratic society from the river to the sea, the moment that that state has an Arab majority, it is no longer the nation of the Jewish people, and it is no longer available to us.
Thank you. Gordon?
So some demographers will tell you that moment has already occurred, that there are more Palestinians between the Mediterranean and Jordan than Jews in the same territory, which really drives home the point that it is critical that we arrive at a two-state solution. Because whether or not we want to have this conversation is happening. There will be a moment where there is a decisive majority of Palestinians, and if Israel continues to control the West Bank, they will stop asking for a state, and they will ask simply for the right to vote. And then we have a critical decision as a people. Do we hold on to the democracy and cease to be a Jewish state, or drop the democracy in the name of maintaining Jewish control? And there's a word for that. And I think that's why we need to pursue peace. Peace has attendant risks. People will say ugly things on both sides. There will be awful, terrible things said. You don't get to make peace with your friends. You have to make peace with your enemies. That doesn't make it easy, fun, or comfortable. But for Israel's long-term survival as a Jewish and democratic homeland, this is what must be done.
Next question from the floor. Some have said that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas must recognize Israel as a Jewish state, as a precondition of negotiations. Others say that signing a peace agreement will accept that it is a Jewish state. What is your opinion, either personally or your organization? Do you need to have the, let's say, the Palestinian Authority say, yes, it is a Jewish state, as part of closing the deal?
This is ultimately going to be part of the negotiations. I think it would just be worth pointing out, and I am not here to argue the Palestinian point of view, but I want to take everybody there for a moment. 20% of Israel consists of Palestinian Arabs. So for Mahmoud Abbas or any Palestinian government to say, Israel is a Jewish state, what does that imply about the relationship for those Palestinians and all the other non-Jews who live in Israel? What is that relationship? And what are they saying? So you could understand, therefore, it's no easy thing. And it is something that will be part of the negotiations. There are a lot of tough pieces in the negotiations. Jerusalem will be a tough piece in the negotiations. The right of return will be a tough piece in the negotiations. The question of where the borders run and to what degree they are demilitarized or secured will be part of the negotiations. What I can tell you, having heard Martin Indyk speak at the J Street National Conference a few weeks ago, he said, I can't tell you what's going on, but this is what I can tell you. All of the core issues are on the table. And our goal is to come out with a final, not an interim, agreement.
I think anything that the government of Israel can find acceptable in terms of that formulation will be fine. It's not necessarily saying the specific words, and it's certainly not the Mahmoud Abbas needing to sing Hatikva. What it really involves is the acceptance by the Palestinians that Israel is going to be the state of the Jewish people, and it will not be turned into a sort of binational state by invoking the fiction of a right of return for descendants of the Palestinian refugees. If they abandon that claim, if they say, fine, we accept that the great-grandchildren of refugees from the war we started in 1947 are not going to return, and we agree that that's not going to happen, fine, that works. So again, this is something where it's going to be up to the Israeli negotiators. The point about an end of the conflict as opposed to an interim agreement, absolutely. We heard last week at AIPAC Policy Summit that negotiators on both sides are wanting to make this all issues on the table, final agreement. And if a final agreement is the end of the conflict, the end of Palestinian claims on Israel, not an interim step to say, well, this is part of Arafat's phased program by which the first part is we get the territories back from 1967. The second part is we get them back from 1948. As long as they are explicitly abandoning that, that is essentially recognizing Israel's legitimacy as a Jewish nation.
Thank you. I now have two questions. One is directed to Gordon, one is to Mike. You first, Gordon. And this question says, and you can say whether it's true or not, why does J Street support the Palestinian right of return? This allegedly was stated in a resolution at the last I didn't write the question, at the last J Street conference. So it's a candid answer.
It's false. We have no such position. In fact, if you heard my remarks earlier, I said Palestinians will have to acknowledge that the refugees from 1948 will not be able to exercise a right of return. That is a function of any conceivable agreement. We also don't pass resolutions. It's not like the convention of the Republican Party where they get together and pass a platform. That's not a feature of our conferences.
Thank you. Now for you. Your organization has called Palestinians Nazis. Is that true? This is a perception when we talk about what the misconception. How have you described or written about the Palestinians?
Wow, boy, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, aren't there? And I
Clearing it up.
Absolutely. I think you can look at some of the materials out there, and I have never seen any of our materials at all even come anywhere close to that. Somebody's holding up one. It talks about, and I'll explain what that pamphlet is. You can look at it. It says the Nazi roots of Middle Eastern anti-Semitism. And, this is not a secret that the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, went to Berlin during the war years. He met with Hitler. There's a photo of that you can Google in about 15 seconds if you're here. And he had talked with Himmler about establishing a Auschwitz-style concentration camp to be built near Nablus in the occasion that the German army overran British Palestine. He also recruited Bosnian Muslims to serve in the SS, and he also started an organization called the Nazi Scouts. This is not to say that the Palestinians are Nazis. I think that that's a very, very long stretch to say that. On the other hand, I think it's both shocking and sad that for the second time this week, a Palestinian village near a major Israeli highway was flying the Nazi flag. If they want to indicate their own political preferences, I let them speak for themselves. But I do not use that word to describe them. The only people that word should be used to describe are those who were in the government in Germany between 1933 and 1945.
In a two-state solution, And will the Palestinian state, when we don't have a magic ball looking to the future, but would you think, or does your organization support either demilitarization of a Palestinian state, or having some sort of army, and to what degree? Small arms, rockets, tanks, they're very descriptive, airplanes, helicopters, etc.
Planes, trains, and automobiles. We do not take any positions on any details of that type. Again, that is for the government of Israel to negotiate with the Palestinian leadership. It is the position of the Israelis that a Palestinian state needs to be demilitarized and that there needs to be some type of effective control at the Jordan River Valley, which would be the border of such a Palestinian state with Jordan, to help prevent infiltration of both weapons and terrorists. That's the Israeli government negotiating position. Again, we don't take positions on that. That's up to them to do. So I don't have anything further to answer on that.
We don't take a position on that either. But people could find really interesting and compelling reading by going to a New York Times Magazine article by Bernard Avishai from about 2.5 years ago, based on comprehensive interviews he did with both Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas, talking about their negotiating in 2008. And you can really see the outlines of the deal they almost closed. And that actually would give you a very good blueprint for what's under discussion right now as we speak.
I'm going to put two questions together. It's about the Jewish settlements in the West Bank. If there is a peace agreement, do you think at all that the Jewish settlements can stay as part of the new Palestine state? And any other feelings about the settlements that you have, whether or not you can get rid of all of them, or you need some for security reasons?
So once again, I refer people to the maps David Makovsky has put together, which give you a feel for to what degree, what is the numerical value of evacuation of outlying settlements, and what retaining those pieces, those different settlement blocks, would mean territorially if you're adhering to a one-to-one land swap, which is the formula that's currently under discussion. It would be difficult for me to imagine that the Palestinian Authority would welcome the continued presence of these communities within the new Palestinian state. I think that would be extraordinarily challenging, and given how polarized the atmosphere is right now. So you made reference earlier to the Nazi flag flying over an Arab village. There are, communities in the West Bank that routinely suffer the destruction of their olive trees. Cars are vandalized. People are harassed in what are described as price tag attacks that are undertaken by people from Israelis who may or may not be from the settlements, who are engaging in vigilante behavior against Palestinians. So it would be difficult to imagine a scenario in which, at the end of the day, a community would remain inside the new Palestinian state with that poisonous an atmosphere.
I would agree, and I would worry, for the physical safety of Israelis who would insist on staying in their homes if that area was going to become part of a future state of Palestine. I would be extremely concerned for their physical safety. We've seen so much of the atmosphere be poisoned, and yes, absolutely, I'm going to take this opportunity to condemn vigilante price tag attacks, but I also think that the Palestinians need to stop the relentless incitement that has led to just absolutely horrific murders of babies in their beds, rock throwing, which is not just stones being thrown at cars, but rocks being thrown with the intent to injure and kill people. And unfortunately, this is a very, very poisonous atmosphere, as you talked about. Ultimately, the fate of all these settlements is going to be negotiated. The great majority of the settlements, if you look at the interactive map or many other maps, the Atlantic Monthly had a very, very well done 4-part series several years ago. looking at the various issues. It looked at borders, and it said you can draw borders to keep 80% of those living across the Green Line with a relatively small amount of land. This all comes down, again, to negotiation. But I don't think that it's going to be a good idea. You know, those Israelis, if they choose to stay, they're going to be on their own, and I would be literally fearful for their lives in that situation.
Thank you. Yes, May.
And I do want to say this, though. The people who went into those communities went essentially because we, the Jewish people, asked them to go there. The government designed programs that induced people to settle over the Green Line. It is incumbent upon us to bring them home with honor, with respect. To do for them was not done for many of the people who were evacuated out of Gaza. That was a shanda and should not be repeated.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Another question. Given that the Jewish scriptures claim a divine title to the whole of Israel, how can the Israeli government or any government trade away land for peace?
I'll go back to the statement that Yossi Klein Halevi made. You can't have everything. And ultimately, Israel wants peace. It wants peace for its children, its grandchildren, and future generations. And I'm going to agree that we cannot maintain a situation where Israel is going to have a minority of Jews in land that it controls. So something does need to be done. And I think the Israeli government has shown the past 4 prime ministers, all of them, the past 4, calling for a Palestinian state. The Palestinians have said no to a state so many times. And that is what leads to, unfortunately, skepticism as to what their goal is. Is it really a state, or is it the elimination of the Jewish one? But you know, in an ideal world, you have everything that you want. You can keep the entire area that does comprise very key parts of our historic homeland. But David Ben-Gurion made a choice in 1948. He could have conquered that entire area. Israel at that point had the Jordanian army on the run, and there were really no effective Palestinian guerrilla forces at that time. He could have taken that whole area in 1948. He chose not to because he knew that if he did, the Arab population there would make Israel a binational state. And he did not want to see Israel become what we've currently seen happen in places like Lebanon, like Bosnia, like Iraq. A binational state with people warring at each other constantly. So this is the choice Ben-Gurion made, and the choices facing Israel today, again, they're difficult, they're heartrending. It's going to be important on us to recognize how difficult a choice that is, to give up. I mean, Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, where our ancestors are buried. But the state of Israel has recognized that for the future of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, peace is the priority.
So I'll be brief. I'm not a posek. I'm not a rabbinic judge, but I will reference Avad Yosef, Zichron Lebracha, who was the chief Sephardi rabbi of Israel and the sage of his generation. And he said, life is a higher value than land. And for the sake of life and peace, we can give back the land.
Okay, quotations today. Okay. I'm going to switch around this question a little bit. AIPAC's mission is to lobby and educate Congress to support Israel. How do you compare your organizations to that of AIPAC?
Okay, I'll go first. We don't lobby. We don't encourage our members to lobby. We don't support candidates. We don't support legislation. So in that way, we are very different from AIPAC. The way that we are similar from AIPAC is that we basically support Israel as the state of the Jewish people that has to make its own decisions through its elected government. Okay, our role is not to say that we're going to oppose policies of the elected government of Israel. And Gordon, it's still on J Street's website that J Street's mission is to oppose Israeli policies that J Street believes are getting in the way of a two-state solution. I checked it yesterday, it's still on there. AIPAC approaches it a different way. AIPAC says we are going to support the elected government of Israel and not try to dictate positions to it. But Stand With Us, we don't do any of that. We are out there in public, we're working at the grassroots, we're working in colleges, we're educating people about Israel's side of the story, so we don't touch the politics in that.
So our mission is not to oppose policies or to dictate policies to the government of Israel, nor are we bound to the policies of the government of Israel. And I would urge you to recheck the context of that quote. That being said, the difference between J Street and AIPAC, AIPAC's mission, and I'm going to paraphrase here, is to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Israel. If somebody who knows it from memory, feel free to correct me. I see some nodding of heads. Excellent. J Street's mission is to advance American leadership for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Those two things are parallel. And therefore, there are days where we're all out on the Hill lobbying for increased funding for the Iron Dome missile systems and other things that help keep Israel secure. And there are other days where our lobbying takes us in different directions. Ultimately, AIPAC does really, really important work. And the relationship between the United States and Israel would not be anywhere near as robust as it is today without that work. That being said, J Street does other really important work that gives voice to the values of American Jews who understand that the existential threat to Israel today is resolving the conflict with the Palestinians.
Thank you. We have our last question. You mentioned that all of the wonderful things that Israel has contributed to medicine, technology, society, the world, etc. Why isn't this brought more to United States citizens on television? Before, I'm just going to answer a little bit, then I'll throw it to you. It's very difficult to do. And there's a wonderful organization called Israel 21C. That's 21C for century. I think it's org. It is org. I always forget. And there you will see all sorts of things, new developments, technology, medicine, democratic issues, going to Haiti with the medical supplies and units of surgeons and assistants. But it's very hard. You also need something reciprocal, someone saying, fine, we're going to show it. They try very hard. You can subscribe to it. It's free. Just go to the website, Israel21c.com. No, yes, org, sorry. My apologies, long day. And you can get it, I think I get it every week. And you can tell your friends to get it, and even if it's not on TV, if you keep on, put it on your Facebook page or Twitter, you will expand by tens of thousands of people who will learn about this. But it's very difficult, and but learn yourself. And then you can talk on to your friends about all these wonderful things. And I ask you now.
I don't know that I have anything to add.
Okay.
I'll add something. Problems with the media in America, in the UK, and the rest of Europe, as far as fair treatment of Israel, are unfortunately very, very well known. And while Stand With Us does not address this issue directly, I did mention several organizations before whose mission it is to combat unfair treatment of Israel in the media, and those are Honest Reporting and Camera. Both of those organizations do tremendous work. So it's hard enough to get a news organization to report the story straight about Israel when, you know, the New York Times has to be constantly corrected on its misreporting of issues related to Israel. When you have a media that will publish op-ed pieces from Hamas leadership, as was done in the New York Times and I believe the LA Times as well, Israel does have a problem getting a fair shake in the media. So, you know, if we had the answers, I mean, basically, if, as some anti-Semites charge, if Jews controlled the media, we really wouldn't have this situation then, would we? You know, what is it with this Jewish-controlled media? Let's get our act together. So clearly that's not the case. One of the things that is available, though, now, much, much more than 5 or 10 years ago, is the availability through the internet, through social media, of being able to get the word out. And that's why we've got films up. There's a Stand With Us channel on YouTube. There's a Twitter account. There's a Facebook page. We have a very, very robust social media presence. And, you know, the good news, I think, is that fewer and fewer people are really trying to get their news from regular TV these days. And the internet is becoming a very good source for misinformation, but also can be a source for good information. So get that good information, get on social media, spread that around, and get the good word about the things that Israel does right out to your friends, your neighbors, and the rest of the world.
Well, I want to thank the audience for your great questions, for being here, Gordon and Mike, and they have tables out there, as does the Federation. Before we choose the door prize, I know that Rabbi Drucker from the Congregation B'nai Shalom and Marguerite, who's head of the Israel Engagement Committee, want to say a few words. I'm going to get the door prize, but please join us.
Hi everyone, Bruchim Habayim, welcome. My name is Rabbi Derek Drucker. I'm the rabbi here at B'nai Shalom, and I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Michael Harris and Gordon Gladstone for joining us, and to Riva Gambert, if you could still hear me in the lobby, for being such a wonderful moderator, and to Margalit and the entire Israel Engagement Committee for putting together this event. I also want to just name what I observed here, and this idea of the Jewish value of machloket l'shem shamayim. This was truly, you guys didn't disagree as much as I think some people were expecting, or hoping, maybe that's true too. But I think it's important to recognize that it's possible to have an impassioned conversation about Israel that we all care about so much. That's what brought over 80 people here this evening, which is wonderful. And to realize that we can have a machloket l'shem shamayim, we can have a disagreement for heaven's sake, and not in a place where there is baseless hatred, which the rabbis teach. That's what brought down the destruction of the temple. And there's really a way to agree to disagree, or agree to agree, and to really bring up different viewpoints about Israel, because I think at the end of the day, especially when I'm dealing with adults and teens and young children, that we need to be talking about Israel. This is something in the seminary that came up, that because of fear of having that tension or that discomfort, even as future rabbis, we were not talking about Israel. We were living in Israel for a year, and we were not talking about the real issues, which has gratefully changed. I know I'm a little bit biased. My parents are both Israeli, and I grew up in a home infused with Hebrew and visits to Israel, and I lived in Israel for a couple years. And the idea of the Israeli newspapers on the table every Sunday morning, and the different opinions, my parents who both served in the army, agreeing and disagreeing, that was okay, because at the end of the day, we loved Israel, and we wanted Israel to be successful and safe. So I want to thank everyone for such a beautiful discussion, and if you'll join me, please, if you take out your sidurim, we're not going to do a whole service, but the blue prayer book, on page 395, we have Hatikva for Israel. I'm going to ask everyone to please rise. Our Israeli flag is right there. Kol od balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homiya, ufate mizrach kadima, ayin letzion Sophia, od lo התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון בירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון בירושלים. Thank you. תודה רבה.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. And can I just have a moment, please? I'd like to do a couple of things. Again, Yashikoach to Mike Harris and Gordon Gladstone and Riva for a fabulous job. I want to thank... I want to thank my committee for helping put this together, for actually doing it. Let me just identify them. There's David Marshak, Larry Reisman, Earl Turner, Dr. Michael Cooper, Celia Meschel is back there. Did I miss anybody? Oh, yes, myself. I also want to thank very much a couple of people who really helped make this very successful. One individual who was originally on my committee but decided she can't do it every time the way we do it, but is always here to support us and to help us, and who has underwritten this event tonight, Susan and Howard Gafen. Dr. Michael Cooper and his wife, who have sponsored the refreshments outside in room 10 and 11. Mr. Michael Bloom, who without him we couldn't do the webcam and the recording, so thank you very much for the hours of work. Luther, of course, who without him nothing happens here at Bnei Shalom, and the office, who's always working very hard because I'm always calling them, I have one more last thing for you to do for me, please. And finally, to all of you who've come here this evening, I know your time is precious. To those of you who are listening on the webcam, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to more of these events. Now I give you Riva and the giveaway.
And to choose, does it work? Yes. And to choose the 3 door prize winners, also member of Bnei Shalom, a student who spent last year in Israel with a wonderful program called Masa, and is now working for a great youth group called
BBYO.
So 3 picked, shuffle them around, 3. There's some Israeli wine and books, and there's tickets to the film festival. Okay, for the big door prize, it is... Oh, Earl Agron. Some Israeli wine and some books. And now he's closing his eyes, no favorites. Oh. No speech. Open it, open it. Oh, Commissar John. These are 2 tickets to our screening on March 22nd, Saturday night at the Arinta Theater, of an award-winning Israeli film, Bethlehem, which will be most likely Israel's nominee, or the film they'll give to the Oscars, and hopefully it'll win. And now, one more. Phyllis Saeed. And you get 2 tickets to any morning or afternoon film. Oh, just a minute. Where did I put it? Did I give 2 envelopes away? Oh, you have it. Sorry. There it is. Long day. 2 tickets to any morning or afternoon film at our film festival in March. Okay?
One last thing I forgot to do, and I must do this because otherwise I'll be sleeping in the streets, and I have to thank my husband, who has dealt with me every day and every moment, and today when I was crying and I wasn't talking and I was silent and I was carrying on. So thank you, love. Thank you very much. Please join us in room 10 for some refreshments.